You are now listening to Brew with the Crew, the podcast where we navigate culture, global awareness, and actionable change. We're coming to you from the University of Findlay Buford Center. We hope that you are inspired by this week's dialogue. Welcome back to Season 2 of Brew with the Crew. I'm your host, Olunife Akinmolayan, and I'm glad that you're tuning in today. We're going to be brewing up some conversation about some internal struggles. Today's episode is called Me versus Me. There's a lot of different ways I think you can take that, but there are two concepts I really want to address in today's episode. The first one is understanding who we are as individuals requires internal struggles. We all know that we're all facing or battling something, but are the battles that we face necessary? Everyone is going through something. That's a phrase that we have heard tossed around and we constantly hear. We kind of use that to help us gain empathy for others and understand that some may not have it as good as we do. Our own individual battles help to cultivate our judgments, attitudes, beliefs, and values, or what I like to call JABV. JABV. Judgments, attitudes, beliefs, and values. Seems like a lot of times while we are battling a lot of these internal struggles, they're giving us different jabs from left to right. It's forcing us to decide what side we want to be on. So are they necessary? I would probably say that they are. These internal struggles and battles are necessary for who we are. They're required because they help us establish our sets of rules. If you want to be a person that is culturally intelligent or someone that just wants to increase their cultural intelligence, which I hope we all do, I think these battles have to be fought. They need to be fought so that we can create a definitive decision. The outcome is necessary because it helps us to decide where we stand, right? Deciding where we stand helps us to engage with others. So understanding and becoming aware of our own judgments, attitudes, beliefs, and values is very, very important for our interactions with different people from different cultural backgrounds. Why? Well, after reading and doing some research, our values and beliefs shape our perceptions. They help us to define the world. That's why we oftentimes talk about seeing the world through our own lenses or trying to see it through another person's lens. We can learn the do's and don'ts from other cultures and try to adapt our behavior in order to fit different cultural situations. But our perception of these situations may not always be in line if we don't have our own cultural beliefs, values, and attitudes and judgments in check. So, understanding who we are as individuals, I think it does require the internal struggle. It's not comfortable. It's not something that we even share with others. We're understanding more just as an example that social media has such a big impact on our internal battles. We know this by now. We've been using social media for a decent amount of time, and we have started to see some of the implications on our mental health. And social media is a great tool, don't get me wrong, but we are starting to understand that there are other implications behind it. I tend to think back to a quote that comparison is the thief of joy. I think that social media forces us or sometimes causes us to compare ourselves with others or what we're doing, and it's just changing our perspective on who we are, and it's changing the battles that we're facing internally. We're trying to compete with ourselves, but also trying to compete with those online. And it's funny too, because sometimes people don't even pay attention to the things that we post, and we put so much time and effort into that one post, and it doesn't really have that big of an impact. So you have to really identify what is most important to you. Is it trying to attract more followers, or trying to present yourself and your character and what you're doing and believing in to the world? So social media definitely is a tool, but I definitely think that it has forced us to enter some more internal battles, but they may be necessary for us to identify who we are as people. So the second concept of today's episode is understanding why this self-awareness is so important for us to navigate the world around us. So to kick off the discussion of this concept, I want to introduce a quote by Nancy Alder, who is an American psychologist, and she says that the more culturally self-aware we are, the more able we are to predict the effect our behavior will have on others. I think that's very fascinating, because if we can try and predict what other people are going to do, that would be grand, but we can never really predict that. But I think she's referring to the aspect that we have more self-control when we know who we are in situations where we're interacting with those of different backgrounds. And there's a lot there's a lot to unpack for sure, but I would ask that you really think about that quote and how much of an impact we can make on other people just by knowing more about ourselves. We're always trying to understand more about who we are through the lens that we have crafted through the experiences that we've had. And if we can establish our own foundations as individuals, I think it can have a really big impact on how we connect with one another and how we each view the world. We see different world events happening and we try to derive a meaning from it. And we can only really derive it from our own perspectives and our own experiences. It's our own internal battles and struggles that I think give us some sense of understanding of different world events and different occurrences that happen around us. And I think we sometimes need to take a pause. And that's why a lot of us are understanding now that reflection is important and is a part of our lives, because it forces us to really sit down and think about the experiences that we've had and how they've had an impact on us. Because whether we like it or not, every experience that we have on this earth has an impact on us in some way or some form. And it's up to us to decide how we're going to let that experience impact us. Whether we decide to bottle it up and not share with anyone, which I don't recommend, or sharing it with the rest of the world through social media. But ultimately, we get to decide how these experiences impact us. Do we allow them to harm us, or do we allow them to help build who we are? If you can recall from earlier in the season, I challenged you all to have some interactions with someone that may have a different background from you. So in this episode, I do want to introduce a new challenge. In this challenge, I would ask that you identify just two, internal battles that you have faced, and what were the definitive outcomes. And by that, I mean, what values stood in place? What beliefs or attitudes or judgments did you learn you had from that internal struggle? Cultural intelligence takes into account our ability to be self-aware. What kind of experiences have we gone through? What have they taught us about our lives? This challenge aims to help increase our own self-awareness. And by doing this, we are thereby increasing our cultural intelligence. And if we can increase our cultural intelligence, then we are better equipped to handle and interact with people that come from different backgrounds from us. The way that we view ourselves, the way you view yourself personally, the values that we believe in, and our cultural background and our knowledge of that helps to build the foundation that is needed for relationship building. Don't forget that it's called relationship building for a reason, and all buildings require a foundation. So in this episode, the aim was really to highlight the importance of self-awareness. Some of the key takeaways from this is that our ability to be aware of our own values, beliefs, attitudes, and judgments can have an impact on how we interact with people from different backgrounds. It is through our own lenses that we see the world around us. This is obviously not an easy thing to do, as discussed in the episode. The internal struggles we face are very real, but they're necessary for gaining a better understanding of who we are. And finally, to close out the episode, I want to leave you with this quote from Dr. Moshe Feldenkrais, who is a Ukrainian-Israeli engineer and physicist, who says, "If you don't know what you're doing, you can't do what you want." The title of this episode is Me versus Me. We're all facing battles individually, but we shouldn't be running away from them. These battles are instrumental in identifying what our judgments, attitudes, beliefs, and values will be. If we are not focused on what we are doing in our own lives, we won't be able to do what we want to do in our lives. Think about that. And we will catch you next time on Brew with the Crew Season 2.